My father-in-law called me sport for 6 years straight. Every board meeting, every Christmas party, every Sunday dinner where I sat across from him and smiled and passed the bread and pretended I didn't notice the way he looked at me like I was something his daughter had tracked in on her shoe. 6 years of that. And then one Friday morning, while I was standing on a hotel balcony in Paris with coffee in my hand watching the Seine move slow and gold below me, he called my phone and fired me mid-sentence because I sent him a photo of the Eiffel Tower and didn't apologize fast enough for enjoying it. He hung up first. No, wait. I hung up on him. I laughed, actually laughed, the first real laugh I'd had in 6 years, and then I ended the call while he was still talking. And then I went back inside, told my wife, finished the remaining 8 days of my vacation, and came home to collect 18% of his company. My name is Zane, and I want to be very clear about something before this story goes any further. I am not a patient man by nature. I am not someone who lets things go easily or forgives casually or turns the other cheek out of virtue. What I am is strategic. What I am is someone who learned a long time ago that the most dangerous thing you can do to a man who needs control is take your time. Because men like my father-in-law, men who built their entire identity on being the loudest person in every room, they cannot survive patience. They were never built for it. And I had 2 full years of it stored up, ready, waiting for exactly the right moment. This is not a story about luck. This is not a story about stumbling onto something and getting rich by accident. This is the story of a filing cabinet on a rainy afternoon, a clause buried in documents that hadn't been read since 1987, a woman who had been keeping score since she was 12 years old, and one phone call from a man standing in his bathrobe on a Friday the 13th who had absolutely no idea that every single word coming out of his mouth was building my future. Sit with this one, because everything I'm about to tell you is something that happened slowly, then all at once. I married into Harmon Equity Partners without wanting to. That sounds strange, but it is completely accurate. When I married Layla, I married the woman, not the dynasty. Her father, Khalid Harmon, built the company from an inheritance he pretended was nothing and grew during a bull market he pretended took genius. 78 years old, full head of white hair, permanent boat tan, the handshake of a man who believed grip strength was a personality. The first time Layla introduced us, he looked me up and down the way you inspect a vehicle you didn't ask to test drive and said, "So, you're the one she's been keeping to herself. What do you do again?" I told him financial consulting. He nodded the way people nod when someone says something beneath acknowledgement and moved on to refill his glass. That was our beginning. It never really got better. It got professionally managed, which is a different thing entirely. He brought me into the company 4 years after we married. VP of Operations. Corner office because Layla pushed for it at a family dinner, and he couldn't say no in front of his second wife without looking petty. He needed someone to absorb blame when quarterly numbers got uncomfortable. He needed someone he could call sport in front of 43 people at the Christmas party and have it land as a compliment. I was useful to him in the specific way a scapegoat is useful. Present, functional, impossible to fire without creating a family situation. What he didn't know, what he had never once considered, was that the man he was condescending to every single week was also the man quietly reading every document in every filing cabinet on the 18th floor. The rainy afternoon in March that changed everything came 2 years before any of this ended. I was looking for a vendor contract that our office manager swore she'd filed under V. I never found the vendor contract. What I found was a dusty manila folder wedged behind the hanging files, fat with papers that hadn't seen daylight since the Reagan administration. The tab read, Harmon Equity Partners, Founding Charter and Bylaws, Origin 1987. I almost put it back. I genuinely almost did. But there is something that happens when you have spent 4 years in a building that treats you like furniture. A specific kind of attention develops. A sharpness that comes from constantly having to track the mood of a man who sees you as optional. I sat down on the floor of that filing room in my good trousers, and I read every single page of that founding document slowly. The way you read something when some part of you already knows your life is about to split into before and after. Section 14. Subsection C. Any employee of Harmon Equity Partners who is terminated without documented cause, following no fewer than 5 years of continuous full-time service, shall be entitled to equity compensation equivalent to 18% of company shares, valued at the time of termination. I read it 5 times. The 5th time I wasn't reading anymore. I was calculating. I had been there 4 years and 2 months. I needed 5. I needed to reach 5 years, keep a spotless employment record, and then wait for a man whose entire personality was barely contained rage to do the one thing he had been wanting to do since the day his daughter married someone he didn't pick. Fire me without cause. I called my best friend Omar that evening. We sat across from each other at a restaurant by the waterfront, 2 coffees between us, and I walked him through every word of that clause. He put his cup down halfway through and didn't pick it up again. "Zane," he said, "that's not a clause. That's a loaded weapon with his fingerprints already on it." "It's better than a weapon," I told him. "Weapons are loud." This was silent, and it had been sitting in that filing cabinet for 37 years, waiting for someone patient enough to pick it up quietly. I told Layla that same night. I have to tell you about Layla before this goes further, because this story is hers as much as it is mine, maybe more. Layla is 44 years old and the sharpest person I have ever met in my life. Sharper than anyone on that 18th floor. Sharper than the Georgetown-educated legal counsel who never let anyone forget it. Sharper than her father, though he would sooner swallow concrete than admit that. She grew up watching Khalid dismantle her mother one dinner party at a time. Not with cruelty you could point to in a courtroom. The other kind. The tone of voice kind. The specific way a man can make a woman feel like a liability he's generously choosing to carry simply by the way he corrects her in front of guests, manages every dirham she spends, sighs when she speaks. Her mother left when Layla was 19, packed 2 bags on a Wednesday while Khalid was at the office, and never moved back. The divorce took 2 years and cost her more than it should have because Khalid had lawyers and patience and a complete absence of guilt. Layla never fully forgave him. Not the cinematic kind of forgiveness. The functional kind. The kind that lets you sit across from someone at Sunday dinner without making it a scene. She maintained the relationship because her mother asked her to, and because burning it completely would have cost her more than it cost him. But she never stopped keeping score. Not once. Not a single Sunday. So when I spread those founding documents across our kitchen table and walked her through Section 14, subsection C, she didn't gasp. She didn't panic. She read it 3 times, slower than I had. Then she looked up and said, "He has never once read these documents, has he?" Not a question. A verdict. He inherited everything, I told her. Never had to fight for a single thing. Something moved across her face. Older than anger. More patient than anger. She looked back down at the clause. "He called you sport in front of 43 people," she said quietly. "He made my mother feel worthless for 20 years. He has told every person in that building exactly what he thinks of the people who built it for him." She looked up. "What do you need from me?" What the plan required was 2 things, patience and controlled provocation. I needed to complete my 6th year with a record so clean it was bulletproof, while simultaneously making myself just irritating enough that Khalid's trigger finger stayed warm. Not enough to create documented cause. Just enough to keep him simmering on a low, consistent heat. Layla called it strategic aggravation. I called it the most exhausting performance of my professional life. For 2 full years, I did everything right on paper and everything wrong in Khalid's gut. I questioned his decisions in board meetings using data instead of emotion, which is somehow more insulting to a man like him than outright insubordination. I copied legal counsel on communications he preferred stayed informal. I took my full lunch hour every single day, which in his culture of performative overwork was basically a resignation letter he couldn't technically process. I stopped laughing at his golf stories. I started arriving at exactly 9 and leaving at exactly 5. I gave him competent when he wanted rattled. And competent made him angrier than anything else I could have offered. His deputy had already started whispering to him that I'd gotten too comfortable, that I was building something. I found this out later from our office manager, who heard everything and said nothing, which made her the most powerful person on that floor. Then came Paris. It was Layla who planted the idea. The only way it would work. She brought it up over Sunday dinner at Khalid's house, the kind of house that has a name instead of an address, and she did it the way she did everything. Without drama, without telegraphing, just dropping it into the conversation like a stone into still water. "Zane has never taken a real vacation," she said, refilling her water glass. 6 years. Not even a long weekend. "I want us to go to Paris. 2 weeks. Khalid's second wife looked delighted. How romantic. Khalid was cutting his steak. 2 weeks is a long time. HR confirmed he has 31 and used vacation days. Layla said. Legal has already signed off. Fully approved. She looked at me. Fully approved. I confirmed and took a calm sip of water. Khalid looked across that table with everything he couldn't say out loud visible in his expression. I held his gaze just long enough to be comfortable, not long enough to be a challenge, and went back to my food. Have fun, he said, like it cost him something. It cost him everything. He just didn't know it yet. We landed in Paris on a Friday. Layla and I stood on the hotel balcony near the Seine, and she touched her glass to mine and said, "How many days before he calls?" 8, I said. I know him better than he knows himself. She smiled. The real one. The one that 6 years of Sunday dinners with Khalid Harman had made rare enough that I had started keeping quiet count of every time I saw it. On day 2, I sent Khalid a photo of the Eiffel Tower. Caption, "Incredible city. Highly recommend." No response. Day 4, I rescheduled 3 meetings to the following week, knowing the information would travel through his deputy to him like water finding its level. Day 6, Layla sent his wife a video from a rooftop restaurant. She forwarded it to Khalid within the hour. She always did. Day 8 was Friday, June 13th. I was on the balcony, coffee in hand, watching Paris wake up when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Then I looked through the glass door at Layla sitting on the bed. She looked up and nodded once. I answered. What followed was 3 minutes of a 78-year-old man in a bathrobe on an island property telling me that I was lazy, that I was a passenger, that I had never built anything, that my whole department was running on autopilot, that he wanted me back tonight or not to come back at all. The voice that had made decades of employees fold. The voice that had made Layla's mother excuse herself from dinner tables for 7 years. I let him run almost to the end. And then I laughed. Not a polite chuckle. A real one. Deep, genuine, 6 years in the making laughter that came up from somewhere Khalid Harman had been pressing down for a very long time. Then I hung up. Layla was in the doorway. Did he say it? He said all of it. She walked over, took the coffee directly from my hand, drank from it, handed it back. Outside, the Seine moved the way it always has. Slow, unbothered, completely indifferent to the kingdoms of small men. So what now, she said. Now we finish our vacation, I said. And then we go home and take everything that was always ours. We had 8 days left. Neither of us wasted a single one. I walked back into that building on a Monday morning in my best suit. Straight to the conference room where Khalid had called a department heads meeting for 9 o'clock. He looked up when I walked in, and for the first time in 6 years, I watched him recalibrate. Not flinch. The man had too much control for that. But recalibrate. The way a chess player looks at a move he didn't anticipate and decides between impressed and angry. He chose angry. He always chose angry. I poured myself coffee from the carafe in the center of the table. Slowly. You were terminated, he said quietly, which was somehow worse than loud. Over the phone, I said, while I was on approved vacation. His legal counsel was in that meeting. And when I requested a meeting to discuss my separation under Section 14, subsection C, I watched the color do something interesting to her face. Because she already knew. She had spent that entire weekend reading documents she clearly hadn't read before. She met me that afternoon at a restaurant by the waterfront. She arrived exactly on time, sat down, ordered water, looked at my coffee, said nothing about it, and placed a printed copy of Section 14, subsection C on the table between us. Highlighted in yellow, margin notes in tight cursive. He's going to fight this, she said. I know. He has resources. He will make this long and expensive. I've been packed and waiting by the door for 2 years, I told her. I have 6 years of clean, unimpeachable employment records, a spotless performance file, and a termination delivered verbally over an international phone call with 0 documented cause to an employee on approved vacation. He fired me on a Friday the 13th from Paris because I sent him a photograph of a tower and didn't grovel fast enough. She exhaled slowly, set the portfolio down, and then she slid a business card across the table. An outside attorney. Someone she said would absolutely love this case. Then she told me the board met Thursday, and that attendance was open to any active stakeholder. She said it while looking directly at me, 1 second longer than necessary. Thursday came quietly, which is how the most important days always arrive. I walked into that conference room with outside counsel and 12 bound copies of Section 14, subsection C. Khalid was at the head of the table. Layla was at the back of the room. sitting quietly in the corner where everyone assumed she was part of the legal team. When his legal counsel confirmed the clause was enforceable, that she had spent 3 days looking for any other answer and couldn't find one, something moved across Khaled's face that I had never seen there in 6 years. The specific expression of a man who has run out of room. And then he made the mistake men like him always make when the walls close in. He went personal. "You never belonged here," he said. "I gave you a job because my daughter asked me to. You have been a passenger since day one. A well-dressed, ungrateful passenger. And you want to stand there and claim 18% of something you had absolutely nothing to do with building." Layla stood up from the back of the room. Every head turned. She walked to the center of the room slowly, the way a person walks when they have been waiting a very long time and have finally arrived. "I watched you make my mother excuse herself from the table," she said. Quiet. Even. Every Sunday for 7 years. She would come back 20 minutes later with her eyes too bright, and you would keep talking like she hadn't mattered enough to pause a sentence for. She stopped 5 feet from him. "You gave Zane this job out of pity and called him sport for 6 years and told a room full of people he was one of the good ones like he needed your validation to exist. You built this company on your father's money and your employees' dignity, and today it cost you everything because you fired your son-in-law from Paris on a Friday the 13th because a photograph bruised your ego." Her voice never rose. That was the devastating part. It never had to. "I love you because you're my father," she said. "I have never once been proud of who you are." 7 hands went up in the vote that followed. It was already over. The rest moved the way real consequences move. Not in one moment, but in accumulating weight. 11 former employees came forward that week. Wrongful termination. Hostile work environment. A discrimination complaint that had been waiting 14 months for exactly this kind of momentum. Khaled's legal bills compounded daily. His attorneys stopped softening the numbers. The board removed him the following Thursday. He resisted selling for 2 weeks, the resistance of a man who knows that selling means admitting, and then he stopped, because pride is expensive and he had finally run out of other people's patience to spend. Carol, the board chair, purchased his equity quietly on a Thursday afternoon. No ceremony, just a signature in a building that had already moved on before he stood up to leave. I sold my 18% 2 weeks later. Omar asked me why 3 times at increasing volume. I gave him the same answer every time. I never wanted the company. I wanted the clause. I wanted a man who had spent his entire life making people feel small to finally sit down at the level of everyone he had looked down on. That had happened. Everything else was paperwork. Layla and I sat at our kitchen table one last time. Same table where 2 years ago I had spread those founding documents and changed everything. "Where?" she said. "Somewhere that doesn't know his name," I said. She looked out the window at the trees and the morning light she had grown up under and the city that had watched her father operate unchecked for 30 years. Then she set her mug down. "I'll start packing," she said. "We were gone by August. Here is what I want you to take from this. Not the money, not the legal clause, not the Paris vacation, not any of the satisfying details. The real thing, the thing underneath all of it. Patience is not weakness. Patience that is aimed at something, that is deliberate, that is backed by preparation and documentation and a quiet, clear understanding of exactly what you are doing and why. That kind of patience is the most powerful force in any room." Khaled Harman spent 30 years being the loudest person in every space he entered, and he was dismantled by a man who stopped laughing at his golf stories and started taking his full lunch hour. He built his kingdom on the assumption that the people beneath him didn't read carefully, didn't plan long, didn't have the patience to wait him out. He was wrong about one person, and that was enough. There is a clause in your life right now, something buried in plain sight that you have walked past too fast to notice. Something that requires you to slow down, pay attention, document carefully, and trust that the right moment will come if you are prepared enough to recognize it. Khaled Harman fired me from Paris on a Friday the 13th and thought he was ending something. He was finishing mine.